therapy. We'd already begun lengthy, and admittedly, really fucking boring discussions on the whole matter. She'd always seemed fine with it, excited even. So then why, on this day of all days, was she deciding to get all fucking worry-faced over it? Then it all just kinda clicked. She was fucking stalling. I berated myself for not paying closer attention to her cookies the night before. I figured that the failure portion of the name was in regards to her comically lame, double-folded fortunes. He who picks his towel up off the floor gets many kisses just hadn't seemed that clever. Shit, at least I bribed with actual orgasms. This day had been mentioned weeks ago, but not since. It was sort of unspoken between us that today was that day. Even coming out here was a little fucking obvious. Seriously, I'm the dumbest shit in the world, and even I knew what we were doing out in silent isolation, no parental insight for hours. The only time we had discussed it was in Carmen's office, when Bella had admitted how she'd been nervous about having sex again. Some bullshit about failure and disappointment, and how she feared that maybe we were just never meant to have sex. There is such thing as celibate couples. This was not my girl's normal attitude toward sex. Her normal attitude toward sex was give me 10 minutes to shave my legs and then you can mount me. Now, I regretted not talking about it beforehand. It had just seemed so fucking unromantic to discuss it, to openly plan for it, to act as if it were some kind of appointment instead of making love. And now, there was no way I could possibly go through with it, knowing that those fears that I'd thought we'd put to rest were resurfacing, and thoroughly cock-blocking me in the process. I wasn't a stupid motherfucker, though. I knew her well enough to discern fear from nerves, and she was clearly nervous, not afraid. Her eyes met mine, and she swallowed, her throat bobbing lightly as she likely recognized my knowing expression. She knew by now that she couldn't hide from me, no more than I could hide from her. I inched closer through the grass on my knees, approaching her slowly. The tree she leaned against was shedding its winter bark, and a few pieces of it crunched beneath my knees as I moved forward, holding her anxious gaze. When I was nothing but a breath away, and she got that kind of hooded, dazed stare, I hooked my hands around her calves, opening them, and spreading her legs. Her eyes widened, and she was resistant, but not entirely, flattening her palms to the ground, and pressing against the tree. I brought myself between her legs when they opened, placing my bent knees under her thighs as I leaned back on my ankles, as close to her as possible. I hope that my eyes were all fucking intense and smoldering as I assured, we don't have to. Her breath stuttered and deepened, and her hands came to my hips and fuck, she was so easy.
I do want to,
she whispered shakily, the gloss on her lips thick and shining, as they barely moved. I could see the tip of her tongue sweep against the inside of her bottom lip, and just like that, I was hard. She'd planned for this shit too. My girl fucking loathed lip gloss and push-up bras. I tilted my head and slowly quirked an eyebrow, resting my hands on her thighs, and pressing my thumbs into them. We can just do what we always do, I promised, not a trace of disappointment in my voice as I leaned into the crook of her neck and just barely kissed the flushed skin there. I sealed this promise with a sweep of my hand, trailing it to the inside of her thighs, and pressing my palm against the warmth of her crotch. She emitted this little gasp, and arched into me, pulling my hips closer. I smiled against her skin, moving my thumb to where I knew she wanted it, and began what was a particularly well-practiced series of activities with us. Hands above clothes first, then under, then mouths, then well, the shower usually ran cold as we came. It was so fucking far from being boring or tedious, though. I'd happily live with only oral my entire life. My girl's tongue could do glorious, magnificent things to my dick. And I hated to sound conceited, but I was quite sure my tongue was pretty fucking awesome too. She'd told me so. Rather regularly. Even as Jazz the fucking prick goaded me daily by finding industrious ways in which to work the term sexually active into his every sentence, I didn't care. Not really. Honestly. But she sputtered incoherently as my tongue moved across her neck, my fingers pressing into spots that I'd long ago memorized. I was fairly confident that I could make her come with one fingertip alone. Her fingers pressed into my hips, and she finished in a breath.
But you want more?
Shaking my head I assured in a murmur, "This is fucking perfect." Unfortunately, her hands came to my shoulders, and she nudged me back. Relenting, I met her gaze and stilled my hand, though I refused to remove it. She leaned against me and I almost smiled at her acquiescence, but then her hand pawed the ground behind me and emerged with my bag, and my smile turned to a grimace. "My sex bag?" She cocked an eyebrow and opened it without meeting my gaze. She began emptying the bag, listing off
blanket, massage oils, towels, iPod with speakers, sanitary wipes, plastic bags, and God only knows what you plan to do with this.
She held up a can of whipped cream, chocolate flavored, of course, and shook it back and forth in my face. "So what?" I come prepared. "Sue me?" She wasn't the only one nervous about fucking this up. While she had been making lists for the apartment, I had been making lists for sex. I had every base covered. If she kept going, she'd find a hairbrush so that we wouldn't go home looking like we'd just been sexed up 2 changes of underwear for the event, that hour burning hot, passionate lovemaking, and my uber-strength shredded panties bug spray, because nothing kills an erection like a mosquito bite on the ass, and my new cell phone. I'd either be using that to call Carmen, totally panicked, or to call Jess, gloating shamelessly about my completely active sex life. And even though I really wanted to gloat because, honestly, that prick had it coming, and I did not have any problem with embellishing my performance, I didn't require it any more than she did. Anything she wasn't ready for was fucked up and tainted, and not worth it. We both knew that shit. My lips curled up into a lazy smirk, and I took the can from her hands, dropping my voice suggestively. "One doesn't require penetration to lick chocolatey, whipped creamy shit from one's body. Know what I mean?" I asked, winking playfully, because I knew she could still fully enjoy plenty of other activities. Because I jacked off 2 hours prior to avoid any embarrassing premature ejaculatory mishaps. And because we weren't leaving this field until we were both satisfied and made use of at least half of those items. Her lips parted a bit, eyes clouding over as she stared at the can, and creased her forehead. The breeze picked up and lashed random tendrils of her hair around her face as she met my gaze. Her eyes were darkened, and she licked her lips. I fucking had her hook, line, and food fetish sinker. Fuck, I loved it when she got freaky.
"Alright,"
she decided, shoving the can from between us and crushing her lips to mine. They were warm and urgent, and I pushed her back into the tree trunk, moving my hand against her once again. When my tongue came out to taste her, I got a thick taste of her lips gloss, and hummed. Strawberry flavored. Our tongues ducked and darted and dodged, and eventually, I moved my hands to her ass, and pressed her against my dick, pushing her into the tree, as her hands went up my shirt, through my collar, and wrapped around my neck. "The blanket," I panted, as she removed my shirt, and I dug through the bag, removing it with calculated movements. Then I had some really fucking annoying issues with the wind, and couldn't manage one of those easy one-sweep motions where the blanket was supposed to spread perfectly over the grass. Fucker. I glared at it and had to arrange the fabric myself, taking off my shoes to use as weights for the corners. When 2 had been anchored, I whirled around and was about to ask for Bella's. And she was standing there below the tree. Naked. Nice, I breathed in appreciation, my eyes trained on her pale flesh, brow furrowed as my hands went to my jeans, unbuttoning them clumsily. I wanted to do that, you know, I added, shoving everything off my hips in one swift pull.
"Next time,"
she promised, watching my erect cock bounce as I balanced on one foot and tried to get the fucking jeans off my left ankle. I was usually a pretty graceful bastard, but the impatience of the moment, and the distraction of her tits, as she stood in the sun, completely unabashed, rendered me incapable of balance. I swayed, and just barely remained upright as I finally tore the jeans off that foot. I then tried futilely to just shake them off the other, so as to avoid another almost busting my ass naked in front of bare-tittied Bella moment. All this shaking, of course, made my dick do this little jiggling thing that made her giggle, and cover her mouth and fuck that shit. You never giggle at a dick. Never. Ever. Ever. I bent down and scowled hard at my jeans as I ripped them off my foot, finally free of them and standing in nothing but 2 socks, halfway off my feet, as they hung low at my ankles. The ends of them kind of flopped when I walked to her, and I felt like a fucking clown. I stepped on one end, removing it successfully with a step, and repeated with the other. I decided that, in our apartment, pants and socks were going to be optional. And shirts. Just because. Her giggles dying down, she watched me use her shoes to complete the 4 corners of the blanket, and then I kind of gestured to that motherfucker with the final huff of achievement, feeling as though the worst part had to be behind us. Right. Wrong. We began making out on the blue, plaid blanket, naked and eager. And then the sun disappeared behind the clouds, and it got a little colder. My balls wanted to both climb back inside of me and shower her with jizz. It was quite paradoxical. As we lay on our sides, the heat of our arousal gradually making the chill of the air bearable, I kissed her deeply, my hands wandering her chest, and massaging her tits. For some reason, I felt like it'd be all fucking tender, and special to run my finger through her shiny curls. Well, fuck hairspray up its ass. My fingers got caught, and she hissed, yanking away from my lips as I tried to extract my fingers from her hair. I glanced at her apologetically, and then glowered at my fingers as I gingerly removed them, stroking her bare hip with my other hand. When we finally resumed kissing, she rested her head on my bicep, and pushed into me. Our bottom halves began the inevitable gravitation toward one another with breathy moans and traipsing hands. And then she threw her leg over my hip and ground against me. And then my arm fell asleep. Shit, I hissed, flexing my fist and feeling the sting of pins and needles as she lifted her head. As the circulation began to slowly return to my arm, we both stared at my fist covered with her curls as it clenched and unclenched. And I was beginning to wonder if maybe we weren't sex-cursed after all. With mutual sighs of exasperation, we hesitantly met one another's gazes and I groaned. "Do you want to just pack the fuck up and go home?" I asked, feeling as though the afternoon was unsalvageable. We could make out wherever. At least in the shower or the bed, we weren't freezing our asses off and swatting away bugs. When she didn't answer, I took it as a yes and sat up, reaching for my bag, and began to shove shit back into it. She sat up with me, handing me nearby items with an apologetic expression. Then she reached for my sketchbook and paused, curling her feet beneath her and furrowing her brows.
"Is this from today? Just now?"
she asked as my eyes wandered the space, searching for the evil pants that had started the chain of sex failure. I only glanced for a moment and nodded in confirmation, lifting a corner of the blanket up as I resumed my search. She was silent for many moments until I finally met her gaze with a sigh, bracing myself to stand.
"You were supposed to be drawing nature,"
she said in a toneless voice as she stared down at the book in her hands. The white of the paper reflected light back into her face, and made her almost appear radiant as she sat atop the blanket, nude and exposed to the air. I watched her eyes flit over the image, absorbing her pose from earlier. Shrugging, I answered, "There's nature in it. The tree, see?" I reasoned, gesturing to the outlined figure behind her in the drawing. Glancing at me sideways, she pursed her lips and curved an eyebrow. Okay, I relented grumpily, taking the book from her hand. I fucking cheated, alright. But it's not my fault. Nature shit and still lifes are boring as fuck, and art isn't supposed to be work. If I don't like the subject, I can't draw it, I explained, slamming the book closed and tossing it onto the blanket with a muffled smack. I was supposed to be broadening my mind's eye. Apparently, I was too focused on Bella, and by drawing something else, I'd be taking time to see other aspects of the world that deserved my appreciation, or some bullshit. I didn't give a fuck what Carmen had to say about it. No one appreciates a tree trunk unless there are tits in front of it. I was just about to stand and get dressed when her hand surrounded my wrist, pulling me down. I looked at her, half expecting a chiding for not following through on my own goals, when her lips curled up into a soft smile. She tucked one of her wayward curls behind her ear, and rubbed her thumb over my skin, asking,
"So, I'm kind of like your muse?"
Her legs were spread from her position, and it was surprisingly easy to remain focused on the depth of her brown eyes boring into mine, even though I knew I could easily get an eyeful of pussy.